Okay, so everyone has found themselves short of breath. Exercise, hard labor, sometimes even it's a scary movie. But when being out of breath becomes frequent, it might be a sign of something much more serious. In part one of Pulmonary Problems, this morning we meet an Escanaba man whose life was changed forever when he fell down.
And it happened all at one time. I slipped on the ice and cracked my ribs, and it's been that way ever since.
But for Dan Lacoste, not being able to catch his breath was much more serious. Since that day 4 years ago, Dan has since found out he has several lung problems: COPD, emphysema, asthma, and acute bronchitis. He's been undergoing treatments at both OSF St. Francis and Escanaba, as well as at the University of Michigan. That includes therapy 2 to 3 times a week. It's a slow process, as Dan can only walk for about 3 minutes at a time at 0.8 miles an hour before he must rest, struggling for breath.
And your shortness of breath?
Yeah, same thing, a little bit more.
Okay.
People especially with COPD and pulmonary diseases like this, it starts off where people feel breathless, and then they stop doing activities that make them feel that way. And then they end up doing less, and then your muscles weaken, and it's just this vicious cycle.
Dan admits part of his health problems come from his life choices.
I really didn't think about it, and I was a smoker in the past. I was an iron worker, I was a welder, a painter, a drywaller, it's just everything that's hard on your lungs.
But there's also a hidden factor that many people may not have heard of: alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency.
The body typically produces a chemical called trypsin that breaks down the connective tissues in the body. That's a normal process, but there's also an antitrypsin that keeps it in balance. If you have a lack of the antitrypsin, the trypsin continues to break down the connective tissues in the body, especially the lung, and it produces the same effect as smoking would have on an emphysema patient.
Something that can now be screened for and treated if you have a family history of emphysema. As for Don, he's down to his last option, a possible lung transplant. But that's a long process that all starts with being accepted on the donor list and then waiting for a viable donor. And you know, Sam, they said that when it comes to the donor list for the lungs, it's a little bit different from other donors. They have to take it so fresh that it's almost like you have to wait for a person who passes away in the hospital so that everything can be done immediately. So it is a little bit trickier getting a lung transplant. Another thing we want to let you know about that alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, it's really prevalent in people of Scandinavian descent. So it's a real worry for people here in the Upper Peninsula. So if you've been having problems, then what you need to do is let your doctor know and get tested. It's a simple test, and it's something that they've got a couple of medications they can give you if that's a problem.
Right. And you know, it was very interesting to me, Vicki. I know you did this story, and it's something that you don't think about. You think about, you know, people have lung problems, you know, oh, well, it must have been a smoker, must have been this. And to find, you know, it can be something that's just in your family, too. I think it's very important, you know, that people get this kind of test done.
Absolutely, and that emphasizes the importance of sharing your family health history with your family members. Maybe Thanksgiving dinner might not be the most exciting thing to talk about, but it could really and truly save their lives. Now, coming up tomorrow in part 2, we're going to have a closer look at some of the more common lung diseases that are out there in the United States.